Welcome to the Phoenix Effect podcast with Elle, Kristen, and Dennis. We are three narrative-trained therapists, and we will be interviewing storytellers from all walks of life. We will explore what people do to find belonging, purpose, and success. Listen in as we delve into the depths of the human experience. If you have a story you would like to tell, stay tuned to find out how to become a part of the show. Are you ready for a good story? Here we go. Welcome, Janie.
I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about where you are in the world and what you like to do while you're there?
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist and a relationship trauma expert. So I'm located in the Orlando, Florida area, and I specialize in helping just women heal from toxic relationships so they can thrive not only in their love life, but in their business and their overall life so they can be empowered and have healthy relationships.
Love it. And so you're mostly a therapist, but because
Yes.
I know you from school, I know you're not just a therapist. Janie, don't hold out on us. Tell us all that you're doing, what you're involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have three buckets that I always like to look at. So one, the CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, where I actually work in the practice part-time, and we have 10 therapists. All the therapists specialize in different areas. So I run the practice and I work part-time in the practice. And then I also have my own kind of passion project business called Woman Redeemed. So I have retreats, courses, I have a membership and planning a conference for 2025 and hoping to bring in a celebrity speaker. And then I also have the bucket where I am the faculty member for the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. So I have a heart to teach other therapists how to work with women and trauma in particular. So I'm on faculty with them, and I'm also on the board for the Addiction Foundation of Addiction Research, which is also founded by Dr. Patrick Carnes, who also founded the ITAP organization. So I'm on their board as well. And then the last bucket is I like to do a lot of education and empowerment through the use of media. So I had the honor to be the resident psychotherapist on 90 Day Fiance, The Last Resort. Recently did a project with Discovery ID highlighting a case with Courtney Clinny, which is a OnlyFans model who committed murder of her boyfriend down in South Florida. So I was able to be on a documentary on Discovery ID. And then weekly, you can catch me on Court TV, where I go on and I educate using psychology and mental health, and I discuss crimes of passion in particular, which is one of my passion and one of my purpose points in my life is to help educate not only getting women out of toxic relationships, but also educating the public when we see crimes of passion so that we can be preventative and be helpful in our communities.
That's a lot, right?
Yes, it is a lot.
Can't help but notice that common thread of toxicity in relationships,
Mhm.
crimes of passion. Can you help me make some connections on where a passion from yourself, like where did that originate from?
So I also have a TEDx talk where I talk about my story and where my passion has been birthed from. So when I go back to my little girl self, being 10 years old, growing up in a family system where it was really a spiderweb family. My mom had three children at the time, two different men. My dad had at the time, let's say there was eight of us, four from three different women, and then my sister and I being the younger ones on that bunch, and also being a biracial child growing up where identity challenges. And at 10 years old, there was a life-changing event in the sense that sleeping one night, and we woke up with my father's ex-wife, I will call her, banging at our front door. And she's banging at the front door. We don't know what's going on. We just know that our dad and our mom just leave abruptly, leave us girls in the home. We don't know what happened. When they came back, our understanding at that moment was that our oldest sister, Carmen, was in the hospital. So that's all we knew. So as we were going through that next day, it was a time where the phones were actually connected to the wall. So our mom was on the phone where she was on a conversation and she was sharing with whoever she was talking to. Don't still to this day really don't know who it was, but she was sharing how when they had gotten there, they were taking out my sister's body in the body bag. So that was my first introduction and my first exposure to, okay, our sister Carmen is not in the hospital. She's actually dead. And no one at that time, Beth, was able to have the conversation with us. So we're just collecting this information, overhearing adult conversations and internalizing, okay, what does this mean as a 10-year-old little girl? And then fast forwarding, we were at my sister's wake, or the viewing of the body. And I remember being at the casket. Again, I'm 10 years old. My sister was 19. And we're at the casket with my mom. And my mom like took her finger and she pulled down my sister's shirt. And you can see the marks on her neck where she was strangled at. So here I am, 10 years old, taking all this in, and my parents having a lack and didn't have the ability to be able to lean down on us young people and check in with us. How are we feeling? What's going on with us? But we're capturing and observing all these things in the world. Looking at that event, that also not only, I look back now, it birthed a seed in me that God was going to grow later on in life, but not knowing that seed was going to be planted. And then when I went through my own personal relationships, not having relationship skills, and just had this mentality that, oh, no one's ever going to get me the way that they got my sister, right? So not knowing how that left a wound in me as far as being guarded, reserved, closed off, not necessarily open to relationships. And then moving forward, then my mother had a very, I would say, toxic relationships when I go back to childhood again. Right. So soon after that, my mom entered into an affair relationship with a man. And at that time, I was the middle child of three, even though my spiderweb family, but in our home, I was the typical middle child. I had a younger sister, older sister. And looking back, the age probably was about 13, 12, 13. And my mom would tell my dad, I'm going to spend some time with Janie. She's probably needs some time, whatever her narrative was, that because I was reserved and quiet. So there was a convincing to my dad that she was going to spend alone time with me. So she would take me out of the home. And then here I am pulling up to a movie theater, and she's introducing me to another man who's not my father. And then I'm in the movie theater sitting by myself while my mom is in the back with someone else. So that relationship resulted in my mom leaving my dad, and I now have a, how old is my sister? I think she's 27. So at the time, my mom ended up years later and having a child from that relationship. So when I look at these introductions of not only the toxicity of the matriarchs in my family, but the woman messaging from my sister holding her toxic relationship a secret until we are going to her funeral, and then being a witness of my mom's infidelity, which led to another child and another younger sister. So looking at all these relationships, I didn't understand that, for one, what healthy relationships look like, and two, when I was navigating my own relationships and also having girlfriends and other women friends and hearing other types of messages. And then I realized that at some point, it's not the way it should be. And I believe that God, being a woman of faith, I believe that God orchestrated that seed that was planted in me from 10 years old, all the way up until lining all of these things up, where all of my experiences, my observation, my training, and the voice that I did not have at 10 years old, but He was going to help me birth that, to use it from a place of purpose, passion, empowerment, and to help women understand their identity, not only in Christ, but their own purpose, so that they can be impactful and empowered to make decisions that can have ripple effect in their generations to come. That is why I'm a therapist today. And that's why, when I'm not only teaching other therapists how to work with women in trauma when it comes to sex and relationships, but on Court TV and all the many projects that I've been honored to use the media to educate on, comes from that pain point that I've now turned to purpose points. And I use all the wisdom that I've gathered along the way to help so many other people.
What a story. So much tragedy in there. And also sounds like a lot of redemption that you've made out of these really painful points, like you said. What is it like for you? This is obviously a story that you've shared before, and this is a story that you've done a lot of work on. What is it like for you to share that story now? What do you notice present day after doing all this work and after sharing this so many times? Like what happens for you when you're sharing this information with people?
I feel empowered and I feel freedom because there's been a long time, Kristen, where I would not share my story because, for example, my mother is still alive and I still have a relationship with her. And then I have other sisters who also experienced the tragedy of us losing our sister Carmen. So for many years, I would get fear and I would get anxious about sharing my story because of the voices of other people who have yet to find their own healing journey. And I would take on their pain points and realize, okay, maybe I shouldn't be sharing this. And I didn't realize what I was doing was keeping shame alive. And I was also taking their guilt or their lack of growth as my own, and empowered because I feel now that it's my story. I'm not sharing anyone else's story. I'm sharing my experience. I'm not sharing my mother's history and her journey. I'm sharing my experience of the things that I've shared with me. I feel empowered because when I felt empowered was the day when one of my family members had told me something they saw on social media. And they were questioning me, Kristen, about me sharing my story so publicly. And I felt empowered that day all the way till now because when I had the confidence to say, if you don't like what I'm sharing on my social media, feel free to unfollow me. And it took me a lot of freedom. It may sound simple to a lot of people, but just being in such codependent relationships along the way to be able to realize that God has a purpose for me. And I've gone through everything that I've gone through to be able to speak from a place of healing and a place of empowerment, because especially in our profession, in my profession, I should say, psychotherapists, psychologists, a lot of people in the helping profession are still in pain. They are still counseling and working from pain points because they are yet to be free. So I use myself as an example to show what freedom looks like. And if you're going through something like right now, should I tell you to share it? Absolutely not. You need to have a process and you need to get to a place of healing. So I feel free, I feel empowered, and I feel blessed. And I feel like I'm in my purpose and my flow whenever I share my story to appropriate audiences.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful that a lot of people who have hard stories feel silenced and unable to talk about their stories, which is a way that freedom really can come, is to be able to share and to own your story and to not feel stuck in the shame of it. So that's incredible. And I'm curious, like, how did you get to that point? There's the noticing, right, of realizing that that you weren't telling your story or you weren't able to share that freely. And then there was a shift. How did you get there? What did you do? What are the steps?
The first thing I could tell you looking back is finding myself in my own crisis situation. So, as going through with Beth through a master's program and starting to look at my own history, my own mental health, my own challenges, I found myself in a crossroads in my own marital relationship. And in that situation, I had a very toxic relationship with faith, in the sense of, this is my story, this is the bed I laid in, I'm going to be a ride or die, or God hates divorce. And I started telling myself these toxic faith messages, which kept me in bondage. And I was at a crossroads where, when I had my son in my marital relationship, he was about 10 months old. And I found myself in a cycle that I realized was generational. And my son was 10 months old, and I remember getting into a huge conflict because where my ex-husband was in his own recovery. And I remember looking down at my 10-month-old son, who's now 12, and I said to myself, I'm becoming my mother. And it came so clear to me that I needed to make a different decision for myself. And part of that was uncoupling to really create a different legacy and a different generation. We can only invite people on healing journeys with us, but I found myself in a codependent relationship where I was trying to create healing and recovery and freedom for someone who has their own journey. So that was the very first painful, wounded place where I found myself in this broken place and having a lot of Christian friends and family around me trying to give me very toxic advice because of their own bondage. And then once I really started getting to that place of self-awareness to realize that I got a lot of work to do on me. It has nothing to do with marriage, children, friends, church, that I have to do a lot of work on me. And the first step that I did was entered into a therapeutic relationship and really started to go to work on me. And today, as a therapist who's done a lot of work and has had a lot of healing in my life, I still see a therapist. Have business coaches. I have inner circle support group. I have a community of people around me that are mature, that are on a healing journey themselves. And I believe that I would not be here talking with you today about some of the most painful parts of my life if it wasn't for that. My own healing journey, my own walking in my own truth, my owning my story, having a community of believers, entrepreneurs, and people who continuously have a growth mindset, but are also mature, means that they don't expect perfection, but they do expect you to continue to get up whenever you fall down. So that is how I did it. And that's how I'm continuously doing it, because I do believe healing is a journey. We don't have any destination that we arrive to, that we continuously are introspective, we're reflective, we have accountability, which is huge, accountability, and we take responsibility for our decisions in our life, where we can see the fruit of our life. So if I say, this is my purpose or this is my belief, you should be able to look at the fruit in my life, Kristen, and I'm a big believer in that. So every day I'm looking at, if my decisions, are they in alignment with my value system? And if there's something that's out of alignment, why that is, and what do I need to do to get back on track? And that's an everyday decision. Because for those of your listeners or people that are also watching, when we have a calling on our life, that also means we have the greater attacks on our life. So we have to be in a community, we have to have accountability, and we have to be able to make purposeful and strategic decisions, especially when other people are counting on us for their healing or counting on us for their journey in their life. I look at us, especially healers, as we're like the Yoda people come to when they need that little dose of wisdom or they need to get back on track. So we ourselves have to be far enough ahead of them to be able to really impact change.
What would you say? I know that we've talked around it, but I'm wondering if you would want to talk more specifically around what was it like for you to start telling your story? Like for folks who are maybe listening who have not done a lot of work on their story or who are still scared about sharing parts of their story and are looking, they're on their healing journey. Like what would be important for them to know about that?
It's important to know that it's okay to feel like you're not ready to share your story, for one. And it's okay to feel fear, shame, embarrassment, guilt, because if we don't recognize that we're feeling those things, then we're not going to be able to move past them. So when I look back at when I first started sharing my story appropriately, especially because I'm a public speaker, is I would feel a lot of embarrassment, shame, or guilt, or imposter syndrome, these types of things. But once I realized where they were coming from, those were the very things that were keeping me in chains and bondage. Is that you feel like you have to, especially when you're in a helping field, you feel like you have to have it all together. And now I realize I never want to, me personally, never want to work with someone that comes off of they have it all together, because to me, healing work says I've gone through some of these things and this is what I've done to work through them. So it feels really good to look back and say, you know what? It is okay, because you will get to a different place to feel fear and anxiety and shame. But that also tells me that you're growing because you're aware that those things are coming up for you. But I also know that action builds confidence. So when I look back, the more that I've shared my story and the most important thing for me, Kristen, is when I would get the feedback from whether it's speaking or whether it's television work or whether it's one-on-one clients or group clients, when I would get the feedback from someone in some form or fashion that something I said was life-changing for them because they've never shared such, and I'm empowering them, right? So we can do things that can reduce shame in other people. And that's why we share our story, not just for people to be voyeurs in our life and judge us, but to say, you know what, it's okay that I don't have to be perfect, that I've had some things going on, and I've been doing this alone because I've been afraid of what people think about me. So when we share our story, it gives other people permission to at least dip their toe in the water and say, you know what, I'm not the only one that feels this. I'm not the only one that has gone through this. I'm not alone. And then we can start helping them reduce the shame inside of them so that they can start walking in their own recovery, their own healing, and their own purpose, because we are as sick as our secrets. So the things that we keep are, there's a difference between secrecy and there's a difference between privacy. Need to know basis, we do need to keep certain things private, but when we're keeping secrets and the things that kind of keep us in bondage because we're afraid of what other people think, or we're afraid that those are the things that are going to keep us stuck. And especially for those of us that are in the helping profession, we can only bring people to as far as far as we've gone ourselves. And sometimes if we can see, because I mentor a lot of clinicians, but if we see our clients keep getting stuck or we're stuck with our clients at certain points, sometimes we have to also look at ourselves and say, okay, what is this bringing up in me? So for someone that has not yet to share their story, it's okay that they haven't. But what are you doing to now start moving the needle so that you're not in this cycle that we can create for ourselves, like Groundhog Day? We keep feeling the same thing, or we keep finding ourselves in the same relationship, or we keep saying we're going to write the book, we keep saying we're going to start the podcast, we keep saying we're going to do all these things, but we don't execute them. And I'm a direct believer our personal relationships are tied to our professional stance. So we need to at least start taking a step forward.
As you described, if I wake up every day and I see myself doing something that isn't in alignment with my values, right? That's your cue. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. Like, I'm doing this thing that doesn't feel like I should be doing that. That's not really what I want to do. But getting from that awareness of I'm out of alignment with my integrity to actually doing something different. We're like very quickly coasting over all the anxiety that can happen in our bodies, right? Even just the thought of changing something or doing something different. And I've heard you mentioned the supportive atmosphere that you've surrounded yourself with, different people. Can you help me make some connections between the changes that you're making, the empowerment that you're feeling, to the community around you? Has there been some kind of support or feeling of belonging that's made this possible? Or do you feel like you're making those changes you and you alone? Tell me more about that.
So I'm a big believer that once we do our work, we understand what our needs are now when we get really clear. Because if we don't understand what we need, then we're not going to be able to understand what our values are and what we are trying to strategically build to. So going back to my childhood, not only being a biracial child, but just growing up in a dysfunctional family system, I never really felt like I belonged, even though I can look back because my class, there was like 77 of us, I think. We all still know each other, right? So now you get a perspective of how people saw you. And it's interesting in how they saw you, what you really felt about yourself. So what I really felt about myself was not necessarily really feeling connected or making these decisions that were just from places of wounds. So on my own healing journey, what I found is very important is our environment, not only our physical environment, but also our community. Because when I look back on my journey, I would be around people that were on the same mindset that I was from a toxic place, right? So if I was gossiping, they would help me gossip, right? So it can be something as simple as that. So once we really get to a place where we understand we have a growth mindset and we get a good vision of who we want to be, because God says if we don't have a vision, the people shall perish. So if we don't have a vision of who we're trying to work towards, then that also means that we're going to just be going through life stumbling. We're just going to be reacting to life, same thing over and over again. And it's not easy just to make decisions and changes because that also means that you have to let go of people, places, and things. Most importantly, our toxic thoughts, our toxic mindset. And then we start making decisions and we're taking a risk to be in places where we want to be. Like, for example, I'm in a huge entrepreneur community. The last time, a couple of weeks ago, probably about 6 weeks now, I was at a mastermind invited dinner by Dave Meltzer. So Dave Meltzer, people consider him, they did the movie Jerry Maguire off of his character. So he had a #1 sports agency in his world. So he had invited me to this VIP dinner down in South Beach. So I'm down at this VIP dinner. I know no one. I'm going inside this dinner. They're billionaires, multimillionaires, just people that are on their purpose and their passion, that also giving back. And I'm sitting at this table and I'm going around hearing the people at the table what they're doing. And I immediately felt the imposter syndrome when they came to me because I felt like to say, I'm a little old therapist. That's not the case. But I felt the little girl in me feeling inadequate. So what I learned in that situation was the empowered version of me said, this is exactly where you need to be. This is people that have a different level of mindset. They're moving and shaking. They're focused on their purpose and they walk into rooms like they own it because they know who they are and who they want to work around. That's a very different environment for me than, let's say, me just going around people in the past where we all have a vision. We're all talking about it, but no one's being about it. We just like to talk. So now that I've been on both sides of the equation, I would say, being in a community and being purposeful around people who give you good anxiety. that make you feel like you've not done enough in a good way, right? Because they create this hunger for you. So I want to be the least person in the room, in the sense of I'm around people that do make me feel in a good way inadequate. I'm not doing enough, make me feel anxious, because that means my muscles are growing. So when I wanted to lose weight and I'm going to the gym, I'm using these machines and they're stretching my muscles. And I'm like, oh my, I don't think I want to come back to the gym because I left sore. I feel like I'm hurting. So I look at the same thing when it comes to our environment and our community. We like to be around people naturally that make us feel comfortable. But how are we going to grow if we're not in environments and we're not in places? Like recently, as I just mentioned when we were starting the record, that I spent a couple of weeks in Spain. I'm not fluent in Spanish. So when I look back now, just the couple of weeks, as I was mentioning, my son is like more fluent in Spanish now than me, being immersed in the environment, not being him, not me yet growing, but him just not being afraid to speak in Spanish or speaking English to him. And he's just going for it, practicing his Duolingo each day, right? He was in an environment that supported his growth in learning Spanish. We were in an environment that supported our growth in having healthy diet, walking, all these other types of things. So to me, the environment in our community should reflect what's inside of our mind. So if I'm saying I believe in something, but yet I show Beth my friends and they're all gossiping, no one's doing anything with their life, but yet I'm saying I have this vision, there's a contradiction that's happening. And in that contradiction is my truth. My truth would be that I really don't believe in myself. I can say one thing, but I really don't have self-worth. So we want to get to a place where our community, our inner circle, our environment, even the things that we have on the walls in our home or the simplicity of our home, all of that should represent us, because it's going to represent what's inside of us. I highly suggest everyone today take an inventory of your environment, your friends, all of those things. And it doesn't mean that you have to do a 360 in one day, but what are the steps you're doing to make something different? I'm cleaning out, I have a 3-car garage home. So I'm cleaning out my single car garage because I want to make it into a studio. So what are the things I'm doing now? I have to clear it out. So I'm clearing out stuff, I'm getting rid of stuff, but I don't expect it to happen overnight. So it's important that people don't feel pressure when they listen to interviews like this and they feel like they see you at a certain place that they want to be there. It's more of the process that makes us create the vision for our life. So we need to all be in a process each and every day to be better today than we were yesterday. And I wholeheartedly believe that personally and professionally.
Mhm. It sounds like you must have gotten comfortable being uncomfortable every day.
Yes and no. So I understand that being uncomfortable is part of the process, but no, it doesn't always feel good, especially when it comes to relationships. And if you realize that whether it's professional or personal, that this relationship is expired because of whatever toxicity or just dysfunction is happening, or you need to, what I call, reposition people. Some people don't need to have a front row seat to your life. You need to be in the balcony, or maybe you need to call the bouncer to help them escort out of the building. Those are uncomfortable. So I still find relationships, right? We're wounded in relationships. We can heal in relationships. So relationship decisions, especially being a business owner, having a lot of people that can work for me in different capacities, having tough conversations, and also being open to other people's feedback of me can still be uncomfortable to this day, but I'm open to them 100% because I believe growth, from a growth mindset, people that love you and that are close to you need to be able to give you feedback. And you have to be able to sit in that and be able to be open to that. So whether it's been my employees or people in my inner circle saying, you know what, Janie, that's really your stuff that's happening. Me being able to hear that. So it doesn't mean I'm comfortable with it, but it means I'm comfortable with it.
Right. You don't necessarily like it or look forward to it, but when it happens, you are embracing that, right? You are welcoming that. As you were talking, I was imagining the little girl who's standing looking at her sister, and her mom's pulling down the neckline to see the marks on the neck. And it strikes me how very uncomfortable your body has been most of your life. And can you tell me more about how that discomfort that really feels like home has shifted, right? It's still uncomfortable. It's just a different kind of discomfort.
So one of the things that I've learned, not only personally, but I also teach professionally, is that we just don't heal in our mind. We also heal in our body and our soul, our spirit, all of those things. So when you mentioned that not feeling comfortable in my own body, I do resonate with that. The vision, as you were saying that, Beth, comes to being a little girl. I don't even know exactly how old she was, but this was a repeat for me. So we lived in an apartment building where there was these stairs where we had to go down the stairs each morning. And I used to always cry when I shared this memory. And that's why I know it's now from a place of healing that I share it. Is I remember waking up each and every single morning and getting to the top of that stairs before I would start my day. And as a little girl, I would tell myself, today I'm going to be perfect. And each and every single day. And now I understand why I did that. I did not feel good enough. I felt unseen and I felt unloved. And I would hold all of that stuff in my body starting at a very young age, so that even as that I was an adult, there was a disconnect from head to heart. And I could not understand how that was tied not only to the anxiety in my body, digestive issues, just weight up and down, having certain eating disorders throughout my life, right? Because I was all the way always in my head and I didn't understand that I didn't feel, and then I'd be highly reactive. So even in my marital relationship, when I look back, I would be highly reactive to some of the situations that were happening in my home. So almost like getting highly reactive from this trauma place. And then the next day, I'd have these trauma reactions, and the next day, let's hug and cuddle, right? Because I released it from the most toxic way, but didn't understand how this cycle had started in my body. So I'm a big believer in somatic experiencing. I'm an EMDR therapist and I believe in breath work. So to today, the tie for me is I still practice those things. I practice belly breathing. I'm part of a group where I go myself to do my own work, where it's in my body. So breathing, I believe in bilateral stimulation movements, yoga, meditation, to constantly, because we have to constantly rewire where we've been. All of those experiences from my youth and early adulthood just didn't disappear. I have to continuously work through them every single day. So like now, if I get triggered, I feel it in my body. I feel it in my ears, my chest, my anxiety. I can't eat sometimes. So I have to understand what's happening and why I feel that, and then be able to move my body through a place of safety and knowing that the bear is not coming to chase me. It's all in my mind. So I believe that's a continuous process because trauma is held in our body. And I've been a walking story of showing how trauma has been held in my body. So now also helping other women in particular, because we can have eating disorders, we can have, and I'm working in the realm of love and sex addiction with women. So a lot of women can compulsively do things sexually to relieve anxiety in their body. So all of these other things. So not only can we just not work our way out of a problem, we also have to work our body out of our problem, because our body has memories that our brain does not. And we have to pay attention to that. And for me, that's been generalized anxiety throughout my life that would be heightened when I would be triggered, and the anxiety would turn to anger. And anger would come out in many different ways of holding all that resentment and unforgiveness in my body. So that work was imperative to do body work. And I continue to include body work as part of my daily routine. Like this morning, I got up and I took a walk. I take a walk every single morning, get the circadian rhythm on my face, get my bilateral movement stimulated, take 20 minutes to do meditation, devotional, and prayer, sitting still, hearing my thoughts. Then I journal my gratitude, and that's how I start my day, majority every single day, to give the first fruits of me to me, so that when I'm going out to my day, I consider it the battlefield of life. We don't know what's going to happen that day, but I have enough bandwidth because I've given it to myself, and that includes my moving my body is a huge piece of that.
Yeah. So many people that have gone through trauma are terrified of being in their bodies. Yeah. How did you
Absolutely.
move past that terror to be able to enter into your body?
The first thing that I did to move is in my own work with my own therapist. I remember describing to her whatever I was going through at the time. I was describing something, and I remember her also being a somatic therapist, like asking me where I felt it in my body. And I was describing these things to her. And she had said to me, she reflected to me, again, this is my first awareness piece. You really don't feel safe in your own body when these things happen to you. And I'm like, what does that even mean? I don't even really know what it means. Even as a therapist, I'm like, what does that even mean at the time? And I remember leaning into what she had said to me. And then once she downloaded some awareness in me and did some somatic experiencing exercises with me, and then going through these exercises throughout my day, I'm like, dang it, she was right. I'm feeling this anxiety, I'm feeling this fear, and I'm feeling it like in my body. And that also dictated to me like how I moved, like physically moved. And I remember like tying that to a situation where I had to dance. And I think when I look before then, this was just my awareness piece of it. I would look before then, I'm like, I would dance, but I would always be dancing, wondering what people were thinking about me. And in this moment, I allowed myself to dance as if nobody was thinking anything about me. And and I remember like feeling, like for the first time, feeling my head and I actually felt my body. And for me, that was an experience because that created an awakeness that here I am moving my body, exercising my body, but I never really consciously felt my body connection. So that was the first piece of that awareness for me. And then from that day forward, I was and I still am, very strategic about doing body work because that's where most of my trauma was held at.
What does that change to have that connection between your head and your heart, or your head and your body? What has that done for you to foster that relationship internally?
I feel freedom. Freedom is my word. Like I feel like free now when I move, when I'm dancing, when I'm exercising, how I dress. I'm very conscious now of my whole mind, body. And again, I haven't necessarily arrived, but I'm continuously on a process of going. Because even for me, when I look back, I would literally, Kristen, like physically dress a certain way. And I would tell myself, oh, I just like to be comfortable. No, like when I was really starting to do my body work, I had body image issues. I didn't feel good in my own physically didn't feel good in my own body. And then I had self-worth issues. I didn't feel like I deserved to look the best whenever. That's a constantly evolving process for me, even today. Even when I was just recently in Paris and just physically looking at the people around me, and I'm like, these people are owning their bodies and their sophistication and how the women were dressed and how they did their hair, right? So I'm constantly observing and I take that, and that's a lesson that I do personally. And I think that may help people is I no longer look at people and I look at people with curiosity. And when I see people who are carrying themselves in confidence and they feel like they're owning their body and how they're moving and how they're walking, I look at that as inspiration because that's something that I feel like I'm continuously learning is how to own my body in a positive, beautiful way that God has made it with no longer shame and using the excuses I used to. I just like to be comfortable and go to the grocery store in my jogging pants. I'm not saying people don't have to do that, but for me, that was a place of self-worth and a place of self-lack. So now I feel free. I look at if I want to wear an orange shirt and I feel good in it, I'm going to wear an orange shirt, right? So if I want to wear my yoga pants with a nice shirt and I do want to go into the grocery store, how do I feel in it? Because before my shield would be me covering up stuff or hiding stuff and using the barrier of clothes and all those types of things. So now I'm looking about how do I feel in my body? How do I feel with my look when I look myself in the mirror? And that's a constant awareness piece that I think we all need to continuously check ourselves. What are the excuses we tell ourselves? And how do we really move in our life? Do we really feel good in our body? And and I'm not talking about from a place of toxic sexuality or anything of that nature, but when you're looking at yourself in the mirror, do you feel feminine as a female? Do you feel feminine? Like, what's the message that you want to send the world by how you're dressing and how you're looking, which is just an embodiment of how I feel in my body. So freedom is my word. And I'm continuously working on that place of freedom. Believe in bilateral stimulation. Again, I'm an EMDR therapist. So myself, I do 20 minutes on my Peloton bike a day. I like to walk. And then I'm constantly asking myself, how do I feel? And then doing grounding techniques. How do I feel in this chair? I can feel the back sitting in, I feel my feet on the ground. Do I feel comfortable as I'm talking to Beth and Kristen, right? I'm constantly doing an internal check. And I think that's something that I've learned to do. It's not something I've always done.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, what does freedom feel like in your body?
Freedom feels like in my body, like I am walking on this earth with purpose. Because I do believe my own purpose is that no matter who I'm encountering, whether it's you and Kristen, whether it's my son, whether it's a person in the grocery store, that I want to leave you a little bit better than before you have met me. And part of that means I'll have to also feel a place of freedom. I have to feel a place of purpose. And then do I feel good? Do I really like literally feel good in my body? Or in the past, it would be if I was at a certain weight or if I was at a certain number, I wouldn't think I would feel good. No. Do I just feel good in myself? Feel good about who I am right now? And if the answer is yes, then that's a place of freedom for me. If it's a place of no, I don't feel good, then I explore and I'm curious. Why do I feel this way? Am I going up against the world society? Am I going up against whatever that narrative that I have to continuously rewrite, right? So it's a constant check on myself. So when I'm in a place of purpose, when I'm in a place of feeling good in my body, and when I'm also in a place of consciousness, when I can check in and I can like literally feel my feet right now, right? Because if not, then for me, that means I'm in a frozen state. If I can at any point in time check in with my body, that I'm in a frozen state, which is what I'm used to living majority of my life.
Yeah. Becoming conscious of your own life.
Yes.
That sounds like freedom. Yeah.
That is freedom.
Yeah. And that's where we end today. We are so glad you joined us. We want to invite you to get involved in the show. First, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That way, you don't miss out on a future episode. If you're super curious, you can also find us on YouTube. Second, if you'd like to learn more about joining us and sharing your story, send us an email at phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. That's phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This podcast and website represents the opinions of Elizabeth Key, Kristen Boskel-John, and Dennis Roberts, and their guests to the show and website. The content here should not be taken as medical or psychological advice. This content is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a therapist-client relationship.